You think you're heartbroken. You feel the ache in your chest, the heaviness in your limbs, the fog in your thoughts. The world moves, but you don't. People tell you to move on, to let go, to start over. But something in you holds on like it's a matter of survival. And maybe, deep down, you know you're not just missing a person. You're mourning something far more delicate. The fantasy, the version of him you created in your mind, the story you wrapped your soul around. It wasn't just about him. It was about what he represented. Safety, intensity, wholeness, the possibility that someone could finally see you, love you, stay. That fantasy wasn't shallow. It was sacred, because it held the blueprint of your longing, your hope, your innocence. And when it shattered, it wasn't just the relationship that broke. A part of you did too. You didn't fall in love with the reality. You fell in love with the idea, with the version of him that existed in the silent moments when he wasn't looking, the way he touched your hand and made your heart believe there was meaning, the words he spoke that felt like fate, the way he pulled you close just when you were about to doubt. You fell in love with the man he was in your imagination, not the one who left you bleeding. And now, your grief is real. But it's not grief for him, it's grief for what he awakened in you, for the pieces of yourself that blossomed in his presence, for the woman you became while believing in the dream. You're mourning the warmth, the connection, the possibility. But when you look closely, what you're really mourning is the reflection of your own soul, projected onto someone who never truly held it. Carl Jung taught that we don't fall in love with people. We fall in love with the archetypes they activate in us. The anima, the animus, the lover, the protector, the redeemer. We project our inner world onto the outer world, hoping someone will fulfill what we can't access alone. That's not foolish. That's human. But when the illusion collapses, we confuse the pain of unmet projection with the loss of a person. And that's where heartbreak hides its sharpest edge. He wasn't your soulmate. He was the screen, the canvas, the vessel. You handed him a script and prayed he would read it back to you with devotion. And for a while, he did, until he didn't. And now the silence screams, because it wasn't just his absence that hurt. It was the vacuum left by everything you thought was real. The most painful part isn't that he left, it's that he never truly arrived. Not in the way you needed, not in the way you imagined. You saw pieces of potential and built a cathedral around them. You saw gestures and painted them as proof. You gave meaning to the gaps, softness to the shadows, and trust to the ambiguity. And that was your heart's poetry, not his presence. But here's the truth no one tells you. You weren't stupid. You weren't naive. You were loving with your whole being. You were believing in possibility. You were trying to heal. Because often, when we cling to a fantasy, it's not out of delusion. It's out of survival. We're trying to rewrite an old story. One where we weren't chosen, weren't seen, weren't enough. And when someone comes along who mirrors our deepest longing, we don't just see them, we see redemption. Jung would say that projection is the beginning of every relationship. It's how we recognize ourselves in the other. But healing begins when the projection fades. When the real person stands before you and you realize the dream is not theirs to carry. That's when you face the ache, the confusion, the grief, and you begin to ask, if he wasn't who I thought he was, then who was I loving all along? The answer is painful and liberating. You were loving yourself, the forgotten parts, the wounded parts, the radiant parts waiting to be seen. He simply activated them. He woke them up. He reminded you of your softness, your fire, your devotion. And now that he's gone, you think all of that is gone too. But it's not, because it was never his. It was yours all along. The fantasy was never about him. It was about you, your dream of connection, your hope for intimacy, your longing to be held without judgment. And yes, he may have touched that dream, but he didn't create it. You did, and that means you can reclaim it. You can grieve the illusion without erasing the truth it revealed. You see, fantasy isn't the enemy. Fantasy is the language of the soul. It speaks in images, in symbols, in desire. The danger isn't in dreaming. The danger is in forgetting that dreams are meant to guide us, not imprison us. When we mistake the symbol for the source, we give our power away. We assume that love only exists through him, when in truth, he was just a mirror. And mirrors don't love you back. They show you what's already inside. So if you're crying for the man who said the right things but never followed through, you're not crying for him. You're crying for the woman who thought this time would be different. For the girl inside who still believes that love should feel safe. For the soul that wants to rest without apology. and that grief deserves space, not shame, not speed, but sacred, slow space. Because letting go of a fantasy is harder than letting go of a person. A person can be blocked, ignored, forgotten, but a fantasy lives in the nervous system. It dances with memory. It revisits you in dreams. It haunts the songs, the smells, the moments you shared. And yet, with time, and truth, and tenderness, you begin to separate. You begin to untangle what was real from what was needed. You begin to see that the man who disappeared didn't take anything essential with him. He only took the role, the story, the character you had cast in the drama of your becoming. And now that he's gone, the stage is empty, and it's your turn to step into the light. But here's the hardest part. You might miss him, not for who he was, but for who you hoped he would be. That version still lives somewhere in your heart, and sometimes it will ache. But let that ache remind you of what you're capable of feeling, of the love you're capable of giving. Because when you love like that, fully, wildly, deeply, it means your heart is still alive, and that's the miracle. The world will tell you to be smarter next time, to protect your energy, to set stronger boundaries, and yes, all of that matters. But don't let it harden you. Don't let it teach you to stop dreaming, because the dream wasn't the problem. The misplacement was you gave your gold to someone who didn't know how to hold it. But that doesn't mean the gold isn't real. Jung believed that healing comes when we withdraw our projections and reclaim our power. That's where you are now, standing at the edge of the story, holding the pieces, ready to rebuild, not another fantasy, but a foundation rooted in truth, in supportness, in love that begins inside and radiates outward. So no, you're not heartbroken. You're awakening, you're remembering, you're mourning the fantasy he gave you, and returning to the truth you forgot in the process. And that truth is this: you are whole, you are love, and you are finally waking up. If this spoke to you, it's not by chance. Healing begins when you understand your pain. If you're ready to go deeper, the Jung method can guide you back to your truth. The link is pinned in the first comment. What if the pain you feel now is not the end of love, but the beginning of your return to it? There is a moment, after the collapse of the fantasy, when silence arrives. Not the silence of abandonment, but the silence of clarity. You begin to see what was real and what was projection, what was love and what was survival. And in that stillness, you start to notice something unexpected. Peace, a strange, unfamiliar peace rising from the wreckage. It doesn't happen all at once. At first, it feels like emptiness, like the air has been taken out of your lungs. But slowly, breath returns. Slowly, your own voice begins to sound louder than the echo of his. You start to ask different questions. Not, why did he leave? But, why did I hold on so tightly? Not, was I not enough for him? But, where did I abandon myself trying to keep him? This is the turning point, when the grieving woman becomes the awakening woman. When she stops asking for closure from someone who never gave her truth, and starts giving herself the answers she already knows. She doesn't rush, she doesn't numb, she listens. And in listening, she begins to recognize her own rhythm again. What once felt like a loss now feels like a mirror being removed, and behind it, her own reflection. Not the version of herself who tried to be chosen, but the one who is choosing herself now, again, fully, without apology. This is not about forgetting him, it's about remembering you. The you who believed in love so deeply that she poured her whole heart into an idea. The you who stayed even when she was shrinking. The you who is now rising with the quiet fury of a soul who is done negotiating her worth. Carl Jung believed that every inner wound holds the seed of transformation. That in the place where we feel most broken lives, the exact power we've been trying to reclaim, and this heartbreak, this mourning of a fantasy, has been guiding you back to that power all along. You no longer need someone else to be the container for your softness. You are becoming the container. You are learning that tenderness doesn't make you weak, it makes you alive. That sensitivity is not a flaw, it's your compass. That your capacity to feel deeply is not a curse, it's your gift. You begin to realize that the man you projected your longing onto was never the source of your beauty. He was a catalyst, a teacher. Sometimes the most painful teachers are the ones who never speak the lesson out loud. They simply trigger the classroom inside you to open. And now that you're awake, you see that your fantasy wasn't foolish. It was a roadmap. It showed you what matters to your heart. It revealed your values, your capacity to dream, to believe, to imagine a love that doesn't leave. And now you know, you were not in love with him. You were in love with the part of you that still hoped. That hope is not broken. It's maturing. It's becoming more discerning, more grounded. But it's still glowing. The next time you feel that ache rising, let it remind you of what you deserve. Let it remind you that the pain you feel is not proof of failure. It's proof of depth. Because shallow hearts don't break like yours did. They don't dream like you did. And they don't rebuild the way you will. You start to notice new patterns emerging in your mind. Thoughts like, I won't lose myself. Next time, I will listen to my nervous system. I will not silence my truth to be kept. These are not just affirmations, they are reclamations, pieces of you returning to center. The woman you're becoming is no longer waiting to be rescued. She's not writing love stories from desperation. She's not building temples around potential. She is anchored, awake, present. She knows that love is sacred, but not all connections are meant to last. Some are meant to wake you up, burn everything false, and leave you standing in the truth of your own light. That light, the one you thought he carried, has always been yours, and now that the mirror is gone, it's shining directly from within you. You might walk differently now, slower, softer, with more intention. You're no longer racing toward something, you're moving from your own center, and in that space, something beautiful begins to unfold. You start attracting people who don't need you to dim, people who see your depth not as too much, but as the ocean it is, people who meet you where you are, because you're no longer hiding. You stop fantasizing about being chosen, because you've already chosen yourself. That's when real love becomes possible. Not because you've found someone flawless, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself for the sake of someone else's presence. You've become your own home. When Jung spoke of individuation, he meant this, the process of becoming whole, of reclaiming your scattered pieces, of meeting your shadow and not running from it, of loving your inner child not through fantasy, but through conscious action. This heartbreak has been part of that journey all along. It was never a detour, it was the initiation. You now understand that fantasies often form when reality doesn't feel safe. So instead of shaming yourself for dreaming, you forgive the part of you that needed to escape. You hold her, you thank her, and you show her that she doesn't need to beg for love anymore. She can rest, because now, she has you. The more you reconnect with yourself, the less you crave the versions of love that once consumed you. You stop looking for chaos. You stop mistaking intensity for intimacy. You stop entertaining confusion disguised as chemistry. Your body now recognizes truth, and it will not settle for less. One day, you'll look back and feel gratitude, not because the pain was easy, but because it led you to the woman who no longer negotiates her voice, the woman who sees clearly, the woman who, even in her softness, has become unshakable. She doesn't need a fantasy to feel alive. Her life is now the embodiment of the love she once tried to find in someone else, and that's the irony. Once you stop needing to be chosen, you become magnetic, not because you're trying to be, but because wholeness has a frequency. It hums in your presence. It speaks through your silence. It radiates through your boundaries. And those who are aligned with truth will recognize it instantly. You've stepped out of illusion and into embodiment. And yes, it still hurts sometimes. Grief comes in waves. But now, you surf those waves with grace. You cry when you need to. You breathe through the flashbacks. But you no longer drown in them. Because now you know, the love you were chasing was never out there. It was always waiting inside. Thus is not the end of your love story. This is the chapter where you reclaim the pen. Where you write without needing to be saved. Where you tell the truth without fear of being left. Where you build a life so full of soul that anyone who enters must rise to meet you, or disappear trying. And when love does come again, as it will, you'll welcome it with clarity. You'll open your heart without handing it away. You'll receive without losing yourself. You'll dance without building a cage. Because now, you know the difference. You know what projection feels like, and what presence feels like. You know what fantasy gives you, and what it takes. And most of all, you know who you are without the illusion. And that woman, the one who rose from the ashes of her own awakening, is not just healed, she is holy.